Getting out of one of these relationships can feel like mortal combat. You can feel ruined by the entire experience and have lost your faith in humanity, love, and empathy. You may feel jaded and ask yourself, why should I be nice to anyone? I get it. Anyone who's been through it gets it.
So, one thing we always learn is that communication is supposed to be a great relationship tool. Well, once we've been through a narcissistic relationship, in some ways, we stop seeing the value of communication. And let's take that on. So, listen, any of you who have read a book on healthy relationships or having a relationship or marriage, any book on relationships that you read, any couples therapist that you talk to, anything even beyond intimate relationships will always focus on communication. And not just the words, but also self-awareness, listening, tone. Communication is not just the actual words we say, but how we say them. In healthy relationships, we're always tweaking this, and we make mistakes. And healthy relationships can tolerate those mistakes, and we clean it up, and then we get it right. And the communication game in relationships has gotten much more complex with texting and DMing and emailing, and written words feel different and are a different way to communicate than spoken words, and then forget about it. I'm not even touching emojis. But with two healthy people, communication is everything. And like anything, sometimes communication needs calibration. And with two healthy people, paying attention to communication does work. Then there is the narcissistic relationship. And the problem is that a lot of the guidance and advice people in these relationships get is just recycled from regular relationship advice, and it always comes back to communication. And many times, you as the person who may keep trying to make it better and can't, you may actually be the one who is told to keep communicating, and maybe you're the problem, and the problem is that you're not communicating well enough, right? Because we always bring it down to communication. All of us pick up a lot of bad habits in every narcissistic relationship we've ever been in. And most of these bad habits, or many of these bad habits, are bad communication habits. We learn not to share. We learn not to share our feelings. We learn to not directly communicate, because obviously it's going to be shut down. We learn to obsess over every single word we choose because of the myriad gotcha moments and the legalistic ways that narcissistic people will catch us on tiny semantic issues. We hold back from sharing things because it will be too exhausting to deal with the aftermath. We find roundabout ways to ask for things so we can get things done or so they aren't offended. We also have to turn ourselves off from listening to everything, or we would end up walking around devastated all the time. And we have to learn to sort through their word salad for the bits and pieces that we need to get an answer to a question. We gray rock to avoid saying the wrong thing or to avoid giving them supply. We have to learn to think tactically about what we do or say. In these relationships, we are basically cut off from healthy speaking, healthy listening, basically any healthy form of communication. And sadly, some people find that after being in a narcissistic relationship, they find it difficult to even talk with any other people. Some folks who have been through narcissistic relationships may find that they sort of over talk when they finally have the opportunity to be with healthy people, because it has been such a long time since they've been in a space where they've heard. Others find, who's been through narcissistic relationships, find that they've become very inhibited when they talk to other people. And even others find that they're almost out of practice in talking with people and feel deeply socially awkward when they are with regular folks in regular conversation. By the time we either get it or understand what narcissism is or leave one of these relationships, by that time, our communication skills are a mess. The idea of being straightforward is gone for us. We learn to play these chess moves to get basic things. And so even we will see that we are convoluted in how we are trying to get things across. Our trust plummets, so it can be hard to hear things that people are saying to us at face value. We may move forward into other relationships where we might actually end up being criticized for not being more open in our communication or for not being willing to share our feelings. We may simply find it difficult to ask for or say things directly, which is actually bad communication. I've known people who've been through narcissistic relationships who are so destabilized by what has happened in the narcissistic relationship that sort of going forward, they have this sort of compulsive drive to want to write things down just so they can maintain a train of thought. Or you may not even trust your own recollections of conversations, so you may find yourself also fumbling. I can't count how many times that survivors have showed up to my live Q&A events and they're apologetic because they say, oh, I feel so bad. I'm so sorry. I can't express myself clearly. Communication for people who've been through narcissistic relationships feels like it doesn't work because it didn't work in those relationships. In narcissistic family systems, you learn that communication was based in fear, in hierarchies, and that some voices in the family mattered and then others didn't. And that one person's word is law and no other opinions matter. That people talk over each other and interrupt each other. In narcissistic workplaces, people make assumptions. They put words in your mouth. They don't listen. Similar patterns are also observed in narcissistic friendships. So if you were to bring healthier communication into these systems, it would basically go nowhere fast. You actually get sort of acculturated or indoctrinated into the idea that trying to communicate in a healthy manner sort of puts you in harm's way. So it can take a minute to slowly come back into it. It's as though healthy communication is a language of its own that we need to relearn, or maybe even learn for the first time. But it can really absolutely take a minute to get there. And being told that the thing that we try, the way we try to talk genuinely, tried with a family member or partner or at work or a friend, is what actually can work with a healthy with a healthy person, can require its own leap of faith. The mistake that so much of the guidance on communication makes is that it doesn't couch it in a fundamental truth. Communication only works with two healthy, self-aware, well-regulated, non-antagonistic people. That's it. Otherwise, it's worthless, like having just one shoe when you need two. So the better way to think about it is that communication is a magnificent tool for building closeness, intimacy, connection, and safety when the other person is communicatable, meaning that they are also self-aware and empathic and respectful and present. And in the absence of that, it's just one more piece of advice that shames people in these relationships. It can take a minute to trust that communication can work and to have faith in it. And it can also take another minute to get your skills back, both on the giving and receiving side of communication. When communication works, it works. In narcissistic relationships, it doesn't have a chance. So here's the thing. When you're in a narcissistic relationship, your relationship with trust changes forever. But it happens in two different ways, and that's what I want to break down in this video. So did you feel, or do you feel, like you will never trust anyone again after having gone through a narcissistic relationship? I'm guessing for most of you felt like, no, hell no, I'm never going to trust any of again. Now, I guess some of it relates to what happened in the relationship. You have to ask yourself, were you cheated on? Were you lied to? Did you get money taken? Were you grifted or scammed or future faked or repeatedly gaslighted or manipulated? The nature of the betrayals matters, but ultimately, not only are you betrayed, you're so psychologically turned upside down that everyone starts to seem like a con, a thief, or a liar by the time you're out of that narcissistic relationship, whether they are or they're not. And this can also happen from childhood. If you had a narcissistic parent that repeatedly made broken promises or abandoned you or always chose themselves or chose someone else, it's the same thing. You just feel like you can't trust people. If you got ripped off or scammed by a business partner or a colleague, same thing. You just don't feel like you can trust anyone. And the mistrust that comes out of being in a narcissistic relationship is different than other kinds of mistrust because it goes so deep in these relationships. Not only are you betrayed when you're in a narcissistic relationship, but you're also told that the betrayal is somehow your fault. So you stop trusting pretty much most people in the basic ways. You go into a relationship, you believe people from that point on are going to lie to you or do a bait and switch or break promises. And then you also stop trusting the decency of all human beings. You start to believe at some level that people are harmful and threatening. You pull back from spending time with them. And that goes far deeper than just thinking that a new partner is going to cheat on you. So the lack of trust that comes out of a narcissistic relationship can generalize to all relationships. When people come out of narcissistic relationships, they will find that they cannot trust anyone. And I'm sure a lot of you had that experience. You don't trust the plumber, or you don't trust that your cousin who says you'll pick you up from the airport, or you don't trust that the package that you ordered will come in one piece. You just start losing trust in everything and everyone. And that is an incredibly exhausting way to live. But then there is the far more pernicious and awful loss of trust, a different kind of loss of trust. And this is to me is worse than not trusting other people. You stop trusting yourself. People who come out of narcissistic relationships or people who are still in them still wonder, was it me? Was there more that I could have done? Am I the one who's narcissistic? You might wonder if you're a decent human being, if you are all the things that the narcissistic people said that you are. Am I bad? Am I dumb? Am I lazy, incompetent, mean? You know the laundry list of things you say about yourself, and you believe them. You stop trusting your judgment, especially if you've been in more than one narcissistic relationship, or if you've been a situation that other people saw kind of clearly as being toxic. You may think, ugh, I have no decision-making ability. I don't know how to pick them. I saw the signs and I didn't leave, or I went back. I can't trust myself. You don't trust yourself after years of being told by someone or multiple someones that you're wrong about everything. You may find yourself doubting where you put the keys, or if you packed the sunscreen, or if you put the letter in the mailbox. And you may waste lots of time in a life going back and double checking everything or asking for reassurance because you don't trust yourself. You don't trust that you remember things properly or that you did them the right way. You replay the relationship, the narcissistic relationship, and hell, even not narcissistic relationship. And you'll replay them and say, did I do the right thing? Did I say the right thing? Was I weird? And it all ends up being a double-teamed trust mess because you stop trusting other people and you stop trusting yourself. So it makes it feel impossible that you'd be able to get into new relationships, collaborate, build partnerships, or even rely on people to do small things for you. You doubt your judgment. You hold back. And listen, I get it. After enduring the mess or even the horrors of a narcissistic relationship, it's very easy to stop trusting your capacity to make a good decision or honor the signs, and to start viewing, and then you start viewing everyone as a threat or a harm or a grifter or someone who's on the make. It's easier to not trust than to take the risk of having to go through all of that again. But you are also wise enough to know that that's not a life to live like that, and that in order to have people in your life, you're going to have to make some leaps of faith. So what do you do when you're caught in this trust mess? Number one, as you figure out what narcissism is and go into new relationships, take your time. You remember my 12-month reminder when you get out of a new old relationship before you get into a new one. You need time to learn to trust others, but you got to start with yourself first. And that means taking some time with yourself, learning to trust yourself again. It means starting small, making small decisions and seeing how they turn out, and then leveling up. But it takes time, and the destruction of trust that happens in a narcissistic relationship can take a long time to rebuild. Give it the time. Don't feel like you need to rush back into relationships and prove that you can trust people again and trust big. Move slowly. Second, practice trust with people you already know and kind of trust. I hope that each of you has at least one person in your life who has not fundamentally betrayed your trust. Practice experiencing trust with that person, enlisting them to help you and seeing that they do. Trusting your judgment about having this person in your life as well. Even this won't be easy, but start small here, just like you did with yourself. Third, don't overgeneralize, as hard as it is to do that or not do that. It's easy to overgeneralize from one instance back into all this idea that all people are bad and threatening after your narcissistic relationship. And even after your narcissistic relationship, people will break your trust again, and you will make some bad choices. That's life. But one mistrustful thing that might happen with a person who's only done that once, or one breach of trust, doesn't mean that's how it always is everywhere. Learn from those things, take a look at what happened, and integrate that information. Maybe you won't trust that person again who breached your trust once. But don't leap right into this idea that this is everybody. Number 4, learn from these breaches of trust that continue to happen. Like I said, you're never going to live in a world where everyone's going to do right by you. So let's say, for example, you relied on someone to do something and they didn't do it. Break it down. Where did it happen? Catch yourself if you blame yourself. But give a long, critical look at what went wrong. Figure out what can be fixed and how you go back into trusting that person, if you do. Number 5, though, is recognize that your relationship with trust may have changed in a permanent way. It may be that you now trust differently. Maybe you just do hold a little more suspiciousness. Maybe you want to do some things on your own and aren't in such a big rush to collaborate, and you're more careful. And you know what? I'm not sure that that's always a bad thing for survivors. You may meet someone new if you're dating and move very tentatively. And if they complain or are concerned that you're too tentative, you can be honest with them that trust takes a minute for you. And if they push it or push back, heed that as the red flag that it is and step back. I can say personally, as a survivor of narcissistic relationships, trust is a real problem for me. I don't trust. And it probably means my career has been held back a little. I don't trust collaborators as a rule, that relationships are very difficult for me, and I have a very, very, very tight circle of friends, and I don't go out of it. I'm also overly suspicious of new opportunities, and I never answer a phone number I don't recognize. I know it's self-protective. There's been so much hurt, so many breaches of trust, and so much disappointment I've had. And in some ways, realistic expectations that we need to navigate a narcissistic world can translate into not trusting every bright new thing that comes your way. At some level, I have to accept that as who I am, or who I've become, I guess, and what has happened to me. And instead of fighting it and trying to say, no, I'm going to be wide and open and accepting and trusting of everyone, in essence, going against my nature, I have learned, as many of my clients have learned, is that trust is a door that's ajar. It's not closed, shut, and locked, but it's also not cast wide open. Perhaps that trust door is open just enough so that you can peer out, check out the situation, feel the weather, get the facts, do your due diligence, be discerning, and then and only then you may crack the door open a little more each day. Will it ever be completely wide open? Probably not. But I'm confident that by being patient with yourself and taking the time you need, you can let in enough light through that door to slowly step into new situations and people, but tentatively and carefully, almost like a cat that's walking on an unfamiliar surface. Listen, my point of view is that if you survive the breach of trust, or breaches, many breaches of trust that have happened in your past narcissistic relationships, you've definitely learned one thing for sure. That even if it happens again, it would suck to have your trust betrayed by someone new again. It'll sting. It'll feel like breaking a leg in the same place twice. But you also learned that you did have what it took, that somehow you got to the other side. And yeah, maybe you'll open the door a little less next time, but resilience means that we do crack open that door. And even if it happens again and someone breaches your trust, you know that you've got what it takes, painful as it is, to get to the other side.
This question, am I going to lose all of my empathy, is something that has come up with so many survivors that I've talked with, worked with, and heard from. Think about it, and many of you understand this after being so hurt, so burned, and especially if after surviving one narcissistic person like this, or growing up with someone like this, you encounter another and another. Many people are afraid that they will lose their empathy. There is also the more heart-rending question of, what is the point of having empathy? You're going to get played. You're going to get taken advantage of. It's my empathy that got me into this damn mess in the first place. So let's take this apart in a few ways. Let's start by talking about people who are still currently in a narcissistic relationship. You may still be in it because you can't get out, or you're just beginning to think about getting out, but you're scared, or you don't know what to do, or maybe you don't want to get out, and all of these are normal patterns. Remember, probably about a half of people stay in these situations, so it's a normal circumstance. Please don't judge yourself. My goal is to give you the workarounds. These are rough relationships, right? Day in and day out of getting no empathy from another person, and the usual menu of manipulation, gaslighting, invalidation, entitlement, rage, with some passive aggression for dessert. Day after day, you try whatever you can. You try firewalling and gray rocking. You try not taking the bait. But to do that over time, day after day, week after week, year after year, it can mean that you start to feel robotic. The human you, the empathic you want to engage. You want them to understand. You want to be passionate. But the wiser you knows it won't work if you do that. So the robotic you sets in. The problem is that it can be a little difficult to turn off the robotic you, even when you're with other people, not with the narcissist, but when you're with nice people. A lot of this comes down to how central or time-consuming the narcissistic person is in your life. For example, if it's a partner or a spouse or someone you work closely with or a friend you see every day, it may be a very primary, central social interaction for you. And as a result, it may start leaving you feeling numb in all of your social interactions. And little by little, you may feel like you're not being sufficiently empathic with anyone. It's as though empathy is a muscle, and you never get to use it very much because you're always living in a gray rock, gray scale kind of a world. You have to be like that, right? With the narcissistic people around you. And emotion and empathy can feel dangerous, and that they're going to make you vulnerable. It's really hard to jump between being a robot and a warm person. And from a survival perspective, sadly, if you're chronically having to defend against the narcissist, the robot often wins. Then there is the aftermath. After you get out of a narcissistic relationship, as we have broken down in other videos, getting out of one of these relationships can feel like mortal combat. You can feel ruined by the entire experience and have lost your faith in humanity, love, and empathy. You may feel jaded and ask yourself, why should I be nice to anyone? I get it. Anyone who's been through it gets it. And then people get scared and wonder, maybe I'm no longer empathic. Oh no, if I'm not that empathic, maybe that means I'm the narcissist now. And people really go down that rabbit hole. It doesn't work that way. Interestingly, we do know that in the aftermath of trauma, People may actually experience a bit of a flattening of their emotion, a sort of emotional numbness. That's not necessarily a loss of empathy. It's almost like a sort of a disconnect from the emotion, and that disconnect almost serves a protective function in the fallout of trauma. But obviously, it's not a healthy or viable long-term strategy, and it's something that would need to be addressed in trauma therapy if that was the case. But the fact is, empathy doesn't just disappear. If you've got it, you've got it. But I think of it as a bunch of stuff in a very messy closet. If you really had to go full robot, because you're in such a narcissistic world, your empathy wasn't getting appreciated. So it's like it got buried under some stuff. And now you don't even know how to wear the empathy now that you've dug it out of that messy closet, right? Your empathy is there. In fact, survivors of narcissistic abuse retain that empathy in remarkable ways, despite all that they've been through, and really test it. I know people who are going through brutal divorces, horrible family battles, abusive bosses, and they still take the time to check in with the people in their lives, or will remember a difficult situation that someone else is going through. It's because you became so numb in this one relationship. It's easy to start to believe that your empathy has all gone away because you aren't getting to use it in a key or an impactful relationship in your life. But I promise you it's there. As someone who works every day with survivors who are going through horrific situations, I am so struck on the daily, really, that even in the midst of their pain, they will, in the kindest ways, always ask about me and if I'm doing okay. It's stunning, and it always reminds me that their resilience is what's going to carry them through this. Their empathy, despite all they're coming up against with narcissistic abuse, is a flame that cannot be extinguished, and frankly, it's a privilege to be able to witness it. It can be very challenging to go back and forth from having a loving, empathic moment with someone and then quickly having to pivot and start gray rocking with the narcissist in your life. Most of us get whiplash from switching. So some people find that if they are in a particularly difficult narcissistic relationship, that they will have difficulty being emotionally and empathically available across the board. So they find themselves just getting more and more numb. As you come to understand narcissism, the impact it has on you and on your mental and your physical health, as you get a little better at gray rocking or firewalling or boundary setting, as you do your very best to keep some healthy people in your life, the ones who have plenty of empathy, you will see that your empathy is there, and it really is, as much as it always has been. But you do have to mask it at times to protect yourself. The more time you have to spend each day with exposure to narcissistic abuse, the harder it is to be as emotionally open with that empathy, because you don't get to practice it, and it doesn't always feel safe. But again, I want to reassure you, you don't lose it. Many people have told me that it took them months, sometimes even years, perhaps after a divorce or the death of a significant narcissistic person in their lives, or leaving a job, before they could fully exhale, before they could let their guard down and bring an emotional fullness and a vulnerable empathy to more and more situations in their life. Frankly, it makes sense to be self-protective after you are emotionally and psychologically wounded. But the fear that the empathy is gone and that you are now a monster, it doesn't work that way, and you're not. Many people will say, ugh, I lost my empathy for the narcissist, that's for sure, they'll say that. You didn't really. Your empathy may have transferred over more to a feeling of pity or that they're pathetic, and likely you had empathy for them for a really long, long time despite all that happened and what they did to you. And honestly, for many survivors, once they can get some distance, either get out of the relationship and get some distance, perhaps even after they go no contact, they will sometimes say about the narcissist in their life, after all this, I just feel sorry for them. And they'll shrug it away. there's still a little empathy there. Empathy doesn't mean that we surrender to someone and listen to their abusive rants. Empathy means that we don't attack a narcissistic person's wounds and vulnerabilities. Even when they do it to us, we don't do it back. We just attempt to set our boundaries or leave the relationship with grace or survive the relationship with grace. So empathy is, in fact, like a mountain spring that does keep replenishing. Sometimes, and I live here in California, which is drought central, sometimes during a dry spell, it may seem like a trickle, but it's always there. And your empathy, it's like that mountain stream. It's always there. Empathy is like a little bit of a superpower. But like all superpowers, you gotta use it in the right place. Whether it is a kindness to a stranger you see, or reaching out to an old loyal friend, or any of the other good people who are in your life, use your empathy with the people where it benefits both you and them. Flex that muscle. I promise you that the narcissistic relationships in your life will not rob you of all of your empathy, but I understand your fear. And if you have to take on these battles every single day, it can feel like there's very little empathy left. But trust me, like that mountain spring, it's there.
So it's not a good feeling, right? But you get it and you're like, okay, I saw it in this person, in that person, in that person. But do you feel that now that you really kind of understand narcissism, that you feel like you're seeing it in more and more people, situations, news stories? And does that give you pause? May make you wonder, like, come on, everybody can't be narcissistic. So maybe it's a me thing. So let's take on this issue because it's a big one. It's one I'm hearing from more and more folks. Once you really understand what narcissism is as a personality style, and you start seeing it as a pattern, you may start noticing the behavioral pattern or the attitudinal pattern in other people. Folks that you may have been giving a free pass to. He's just a big talker. They don't mean it. Or she had a rough start. Or it's been a tough year for them. That now, in fact, you're seeing it more clearly. And you become aware that actually that perhaps you came into awareness of narcissism because of one primary relationship that was causing a lot of pain and heartache for you. And then once you got it, really got it, you actually started seeing it in other people that weren't even like, you weren't even taking as much notice of their behaviors. And instead of that feeling like a sense of tremendous liberation, yeah, great, I get it, I see it now, I can honor what I'm seeing and step away. Instead, many folks will say, it can't be all of these people. Maybe I was the problem all along. It's really arrogant of me to think this. So what's the truth? Here's the thing. It's very rare for a person to have just one toxic or narcissistic person in their lives. It tends to be a bit of a clustering effect. And this is really pronounced if it started for you in childhood. There are many issues that come out of growing up in a narcissistic family, but most pointedly, one of the worst issues is that coming from or growing up in a narcissistic family means that you get acculturated to narcissism. You become assimilated to it. Invalidation, gaslighting, manipulation, all of it almost goes unnoticed. Only years later, once it kind of starts burning you out or you encounter it in adulthood and you finally get the narcissism decoder ring, only then are you able to look back maybe more clearly at what your family of origin was about. But this indoctrination means that you don't take note of how toxic these patterns are once you start encountering them in adulthood. That's not to say they feel good, but they may not register as a problem. Selfishness and entitlement might almost feel expected. So when people behave like this, you may not like it, but you may not even notice it. And it may be simply taken as, well, this is how people are. Throw some trauma bonding in there, and the familiar toxic or narcissistic patterns get justified, and the old patterns of being what the other person needs you to be so you can get your attachment needs met ends up in a not very good place. As a result, many unhealthy people may pile up in your life. And then, as you start to learn about narcissism, and especially if you're able to distance from or end relationships with the most problematic narcissistic people in your life, you may find that you have unearthed more unhealthy people, but that they may have gone unnoticed for a while in your life. You may have also become quite savvy at picking out the pattern in brand new people in your life. But some of those old patterns, like self-doubt and self-blame, they don't fade easily. So even as your intuition and knowledge are picking up these unhealthy patterns, you may wonder if it's you and whether that your sensitivity is too strong. Survivors of narcissistic abuse often remain concerned about their issues with trust. Narcissistic relationships are about betrayal. So as a result, trust gets eroded, and it's really difficult to build it in new relationships. So as time goes on and you're having more and more difficulty trusting people, you may wonder if you're taking note of different people's behavioral patterns as being narcissistic is actually more about your issues with trust than about an actual issue with their behavior. Probably not. Let's start with the issue that the proliferation of narcissism out there is not a small number of folks. And remember, I can't put too fine a point on this. I am not talking about narcissistic personality disorder. Not. I am talking about people with a sufficient presence of narcissistic traits for their behavior to be a problem. I don't know. Who knows if they meet criteria for the personality disorder? It doesn't matter. My spitball on the number is probably around 20% of folks, maybe a little bit higher in major metropolitan areas like LA or New York or London, but that's 1 in 5. 1 in 5 people. Take account of the number of people you know in your life and divide by 5. You know 20 people, 4 of them may have some really difficult, jagged personalities. And as I think on this, I'm thinking of the people I have the most contact with. A quick straw poll of 10 people I know. I hit 2.5. I'm on the fence about one of them. Give it a try and you're going to see that number of 1 in 5 people who have significant presence of narcissistic personality traits and behaviors. It's about right, right? Now, just as we justify patterns in our narcissistic relationships, convincing ourselves that maybe we are being too critical by thinking about the potential narcissism of people we know or are meeting, maybe that's too judgy. That can mean that we keep sticking around people who aren't good for us until we're convinced. I liken it to one of those haunted houses where you may step up to the scary thing until it makes a noise and then you shriek and jump back. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe we need to stick around long enough for the scary thing to happen. It's not good for us though, right? Someone like me, I tend to overcorrect. I think and deal with narcissism too much in my professional life. So if I experience any of that entitled posturing, non-self-aware, arrogant, snobby stuff, I tend to cut bait pretty fast. That may not be for everyone, but before you talk yourself out of something you're aware and you see the patterns, or wait to see if it was what you actually thought it was, and by actually testing it out or getting scared by it, remember that that might mean that you're still gaslighting yourself. I mean, listen, folks, someone telling you, I don't know, that your favorite TV show sucks when you meet them at a party, or someone who says that they have a different political party affiliation than you, or someone that yammers on about their expensive car all night, even those things may be annoying or they may be off-putting, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're narcissistic. You have to watch someone rather carefully and for a minute to genuinely determine how unhealthy their patterns are in the long term. For example, are they listening to you or anyone else? Do you notice a tone of contempt or dismissiveness in their voice? Are they uncomfortable when the conversation's not about them? Are they snobby? I mean, snobbishness in and of itself may not be narcissism, but let me tell you this, I'm always willing to take the bet on that. I abhor snobbishness, and it is one of those patterns that almost always seems to have narcissism behind it. But those things, those questions to ask yourself when you meet someone, you can learn some of that stuff pretty early on. And remember, narcissism is about process more than it's about content. How the person is rather than exactly what they say. Sometimes that expensive car talking person is just like a little kid who's talking about a new Lego set. But that person may also be willing to hear other people's thoughts and feelings, may not judge other people for not being as car focused as them. They may just be excited about their new car. We tend to get lost in the low-hanging fruit of what people talk about instead of focusing on how they talk about it. So be judicious with this word narcissism. It's overused, so it's losing its meaning. Don't get caught up in trying to find all the narcissistic people in your midst, or trying to figure out if someone is indeed narcissistic 10 minutes after meeting them. But instead focus on whether their behavior feels uncomfortable and invalidating. And if it does, that should be enough of a reason to at least step back, step away, slow down, or get out. So don't doubt yourself. If you're new to the, oh damn, I just recognized my blank is a narcissistic person, and now I'm noticing it in lots of other people, you may just be in the midst of the acute cleanup phase. The best way to figure out if someone's behavior patterns are unhealthy is to take it slow. Pay attention to the how and not just the what. Pay attention to your body. And then you don't need to do an about face and march out if you think someone's narcissistic, but you can slowly disengage. You can watch them from a distance, and recognizing that honoring these new signals within yourself may be a new experience for you. Pay attention. The best way to avoid bringing more narcissistic people into your life, or to make the existing narcissistic abuse you are experiencing worse, is to nip it in the bud whenever possible. And maybe these folks are not fully narcissistic per se, but rather there are patterns here that have been a problem in the past in other relationships. You really have to ask yourself, do you really want to do this again? So yeah, it kind of doesn't feel good to feel like, oh, I'm seeing this more and more. The tendency of a lot of folks is to wonder, is this me? Probably not you. It's a little bit more common than a lot of us dreamed. And again, you don't have to do the about face. You can slow it down, pay attention. But as the signs pile up, by taking it slow, hopefully you haven't engaged so much that when you do step away, there's minimal muss and fuss. Thanks again.